Okay, so there's recording. Now I'm going to share and go back into chapter 15. Okay, here we go. So basically what I, as I said, is I just kind of summarize some of the key concepts here. Let me see if I can actually get this bigger. It's like I can't. So again, because you're doing your capstone projects, what I really wanted to be able to kind of finish out this class on was how do you assess the riskiness of a project? How do you value that project and compare it against other projects? I think that is what the idea was here. And so what this chapter is really about is giving you an introduction to different ways of comparing projects with other projects, or how to understand and analyze a project to see if it's worthwhile to do. And obviously it has a very financial focus. And a lot of the chapter is spent around trying to convey how to do analysis on the financial aspects of the project, right? So that's like 95% of the chapter, but there is some of the chapter in the back that does talk about the qualitative aspects of a project. So I think just to make the point that you're not always going to determine to go with a certain project just because of the financial implications, obviously, right? You have to look at lots of other factors. And so there are some qualitative methods that you will want to look at as well, right? When you want to evaluate whether a project is worthwhile. And including, if you're in a nonprofit, it would be your mission would be involved. And then there's a whole slew of different sort of items that the chapter shares around what would make sense. Looks like I got stuck here for some reason. My Excel file's not working. Let me see if I can just get back to this. Oh, here we go. Okay. I'm just going to run down to that first because that is definitely an interesting way to think about it. So I don't know if anyone here has had to deal with looking at, sort of a qualitative method for assessing projects. Has anyone had to work on anything like that?
No.
No? Okay. So this is an example of that. So maybe we'll just start there first. So this is an example of different factors that one may consider while they're evaluating a project. Now this could be a project here that doesn't have any revenue, and I know some of the projects that you guys are working on may not have revenue, but there may be things like whether this service is a new initiative for your organization, and if it would require you to create a new service line, or if it would require that you have to, expand your existing lines of service in order to undertake, or, would be something that you would have as a precursor to taking on the project, that's what it would require. And that may be something that you will determine or would determine that that's not worth it because that would be a lot of cost for you or a lot of just management time, right? And then, that could lead into the second, which is an item that a lot of folks don't think about, which is, does your existing management team understand, how to take on this project? Do they have expertise around it? Okay. And that can be a really big problem. I know what I've seen in my work is that often management's bandwidth is underestimated. And so when they think something is a really good idea, the management team, the executive team just don't have the time to actually implement it. And so, that's a really common mistake that's made. I don't know if anyone can relate to that.
No.
Yeah. Another thing to look at would be sort of just how difficult is it to recruit for any specific technical expertise that you were needed to implement a project. It could be a very expensive piece of machinery, and maybe the tech that's needed or the training that's needed to operate that machinery is just something that's very difficult to find. And And then, what's the competitive landscape of doing this project? Would it create more competition for your agency, or are the competitors that you'd be working with like very large? Are you setting yourself up for failure? And then lastly, is there technology that you're going to have to take on to do the project that is unproven, and maybe it's costly? So I think the idea here is that when you assess risk of a project, it's not only financial risk that you need to look at, right? It's also lots of other types of things. So when we think about risk or value of a project, it's definitely not only financial, right? And I think we can also kind of harken back to the discussions we were having in the very first few chapters, where we talked about what is the idea of the reform, the Medi-Cal reform, right? And a lot of it has to do with improved access to care, improved quality of care, right? And reduce cost. Those are the three key things that a lot of the organizations are focused on these days. And so when you think in terms of your project, you're also, you want to think in terms of those items as well. As like, hopefully your projects have some type of impact in those areas. Okay, so you just have to think a little bit more outside the box, but they're there because at the end of the day, why would you do a project that there's no value, right? Some type of value, and usually you can quantify that value, but not always. So the idea with this qualitative is that it could be a standalone analysis that you do, or it could be something that you do in concert with the financial analysis, so that you're truly looking at both things together and you're weighing them. Okay. And then this matrix that that just kind of created here is where you would potentially say a 0 is it's not a factor, a 1 is it's medium factor, and a 2 that it's a great factor, a large factor. And then maybe you start weighting each one of the different criteria, and then at the end you come up with a score, and then you could say which one is, if I'm over a certain number for any of these, then I wouldn't want to do it, let's say. Okay, so again, it's just another model to think about why a project would make sense or not. So that concept of evaluating a project is essentially what the financial metrics that we're learning about in this chapter do as well. They're just another way of analyzing whether a project makes sense or not. Okay, and so what a lot of the concepts that I'll just kind of go over here are really around that framework. Okay, so when we do risk analysis of a project from a financial perspective, we do look at three types of things. We look at how do we define the type of risk that is relevant to the project? How do we measure the risk? And then how do we incorporate the risk assessment into the capital budget process? Okay. And so one of the things to think about when we're talking about risk of projects, does anyone know what the most important, or sort of financially speaking, what the most uncertain or riskiest area is around capital projects, or just projects? So when you undertake a project, often you're having a cash flow that you have to invest in something up front, right?
The higher rate of return, the higher the risk.
So the riskiness of the project is really about what does your return look like. So if I'm investing money now, today, on a project, I'm hoping that I'm going to get some money back in the future, right? If I'm investing a bunch of money now and I don't get any money back in the future, then is it worth it, right? Is it worth it? And then this is what this net present value concept allows us to do. It allows us to try to understand how valuable the project is to us based on what we have to spend today and what we expect to get back in the future, right? And is it a worthwhile project, right? So again, in some sense, it's fairly intuitive. If I have to spend $100,000 today and I get back 100,000 for the next 5 years, well, that's a pretty good return on my investment, isn't it? Because I'm going to get $500 back in the next 5 years. That's great. But if it's, if it's only $10,000 a year for the next 5 years, then why would I do it? If I'm spending $100,000 today and I'm only going to get $50,000 back in the next 5 years, then what would be the benefit of me doing that, right? So those are kind of simple examples of it, but the idea, the risk to a project isn't how much you spend on it today, but it's how accurate are your assumptions around those future cash flows. So in a perfect world, you would know exactly what your cash flow is going to look like in the future, how much money you're going to generate from your project, or how much cost reduction that you're going to generate from your project. That would be a perfect world, right? And then you could easily determine using net present value calculation whether it's worth it or not. But the challenge is that nothing's that easy, right? You don't absolutely know whether you're going to get the returns that you're estimating or not. There's a lot of risk in the assumptions. And so the idea is, what we're trying to introduce here is that there are some tools that we can use to try to help us equalize the risk, so that we're not taking on something that's extremely risky and making assumptions that we're going to get this great return when the probability is that we probably won't. Kind of fooling ourselves, right? So like if we were to say, hey, if I buy a lottery ticket, if I buy 1 million lottery tickets today, or if I buy a one lottery ticket for the next, 5 years, the probability, that I would actually win the lottery is still very, very, very small, right? So once you introduce the probability into the equation, it really does change the answer, right? So if somebody says, hey, if I won the lottery, I'd have, $1 million. So wow, that would be great. But the reality is the probability is very, very small. So it doesn't necessarily make sense, right? And the lottery example is a good one because, if you're going to spend money on a lottery ticket, and the lottery is not that big, you may not decide it's worth it, right? But once the lottery gets into the billions of dollars, you have a lot more people who all of a sudden have decided to buy lottery tickets, people that normally never would buy a lottery ticket, but they finally determined that the risk is worth the reward. The money that you're paying today is actually worth the return, that the potential return that's out there, right? And so it is about risk and probability. So, okay. So I think I highlighted in red, the higher the risk associated with an investment, the higher the rate of return that we want to utilize and to use to evaluate the project, okay? Okay, and so the ultimate goal is to ensure that the cost of capital, which is what we're using as our discount rate, that's what we're calling our interest rate, so to speak, right? Is what we're using to project the return on investment, right? And we want that discount rate to, in fact, be, representative of the risk of the project. So if you have a very risky project, you want to have a very high, discount rate. You want to have a high rate so that you make sure that you are going to make enough in the future to sort of pass that hurdle, that discount rate. Okay. So if you have a low risk, then you don't need to have much of a discount rate. If you have an absolute certainty, then you don't even need a discount rate, right? If you know you're going to get something, then there's no need for a discount rate. Okay. I'm going to move on to the 3 different types of risk. So this concept of standalone risk is something that is a new concept, and really what happens when you look at a project, often if you are a large corporation and you have the opportunity to, do multiple projects, you may assess or you may define one cost of capital, right? And that's a cost that, like a percentage that is used for all projects. There are other things that you would also evaluate if you have a whole portfolio of projects. But for the purposes of determining the riskiness of a project, it's really important that we think in terms of a standalone concept, meaning that, the assumptions are held in isolation. There's no relationship with anything else besides the project itself, okay? And that's what this whole sort of idea of the standalone project is. And that just allows us to sort of have our base case, which is completely isolated from any other factor. That is our standalone. And then we can always add to that as we need to. But that's what the idea of a standalone risk is, okay? Any questions on that? Okay, and then we have corporate risk, which is simply, a big corporation. They look at, lots of different projects in a portfolio. So they're going to look at risk in a different way. They might be able to take a little bit more risk with one project because they know there's less risk with another. So again, it's a portfolio, right, that they're looking at in their corporation, let's say, in their business portfolio. And then the market is, sort of at large, all the different types of risk are all diversified. And you're kind of looking at that and saying that it's a large mix across the market. So it's almost the opposite of a standalone risk, essentially. There's so many other factors being involved in that. Our focus is on standalone risk, as I said. Then we'll use judgment to translate that to corporate or market if we need to. But the idea is that we start with. Hi, is that somebody? Jennifer, is that? I think that might be you. Are you in a noisy place?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right. And so next we have I want to just kind of introduce the different types of the different quantitative techniques that the chapter introduces around assessing project risk, okay? And again, this is looking at a project to trying to analyze whether it's important to do the project, it makes sense, it's valuable, and so forth, right? So the first type of analysis that is done is called the sensitivity analysis. And really that is looking at a single variable. So you might have a project, again, if we go back to the book gives an example of buying a machine. And, the MRI machine costs a certain amount of money. And that machine, we assume that it's going to bring a certain value over time. So by allowing us to, have a certain number of clients and patients and a certain amount of usage over time, we can estimate what the cash, outflows or inflows, will be in the future, right? So we know that it's going to cost us X amount today, but we'll get a certain amount of inflows in the future, right? And then we have, maintenance costs, and we have other types of costs that we know we're going to have to pay for this machine and depreciation and so forth. But what we may determine is the most important or the most sensitive variable is our assumption on the units of the machine, how much usage the machine gets. So we would have the ability to do a sensitivity analysis, leaving all other assumptions static or leaving them the same, and just making a change on the volume. And then we could get a good sense for what that would look like over a whole bunch of different scenarios. Like we just say, let's start with a small amount of volume and do a scenario up to the large amount of volume. Okay. So that's essentially what that is. It looks at a range of likely values across these variables. Okay. Then there's the scenario analysis. Okay. And now this one's just a little bit more complex because this scenario analysis allows us to do more than one input. Okay. It is actually, you may say, I want to look at both the volume of the machine and I also want to look at the salvage value. That was the book's example. So we want to look at those two key variables and we want to do different scenarios with changes in those two key variables. And I want to see if we're comfortable at the end of the day with, the span of the variables, or, if we determine that what we may think is a likely scenario isn't profitable, then we may decide not to do the project, right? So it's like looking at a variety of different assumptions and then would help you determine whether or not the project is profitable. Okay, and that's a scenario analysis. And then we talk about the Monte Carlo analysis. And the Monte Carlo analysis is it's a complex analysis that's often used with a program. And what it does is it allows you to do a sort of almost a continuous probability distribution. So you can say, I want my formula to look at these three variables, but I want to look at any type of scenario or any type of scenario that includes various values for these three variables. So it's just literally going to create all the possible scenarios that you could have that could come to fruition, and then it allows you to sort of aggregate it and look at it in one view, one picture. So it takes all of that and allows you to aggregate. Okay, so it does give you the complete range of everything. So it's actually a pretty good tool if you use that. Okay, and okay, so that's kind of I think some of the key concepts here in the book. Let me just go through here and see if there's anything else that I did talk about the quality already. Okay, and then I think what we move into then is once we get past the different tools, we move into how do we then use these tools in our capital budget process. So let me just stop for a minute and say, folks understand what a capital budget is, right? Do people, do you think you get that idea and that concept of what a capital budget is? And how does a capital budget differ from just a regular financial budget?
It's a bigger investment on like fixed assets to see how much they can generate revenue to see if it's worth it or not.
Right.
Like acquiring an already existing building or a company, or just making your own department.
Right. So it's often when you want to make a major investment, right? It's not necessarily your ongoing operations, but it's really about making some large investment, whether it be capital or, like you say, property, plant, and equipment, very large investments, and whether or not it makes sense to make those investments, right? So when you create your operational budget, you also normally produce a capital budget as well. Now, these really large multi-year projects don't happen all the time, but you might just have equipment that you're purchasing one year, but every year you may have some investments you need to make. So that's what a capital budget is. It's like just accumulation of all the different types of investments that you would like to make. And sometimes, there are organizations that have excess cash that they can use to reinvest in their organization. So they're continuously looking for good projects to use their excess cash on, right? And so having the ability to analyze different opportunities, different projects and investment opportunities is really important to some organizations. And that's what essentially these tools allow us to do, okay? So how do we use these risk tools and how do we incorporate them into our capital budget? And that's essentially, there's kind of two different ways that the chapter talks about here. One is called the certainty equivalent method, and the other is called the risk adjusting discount rate. Okay. Now, it talks about this first one, the certainty equivalent method, because I think it's probably a little bit more pure, but it's a much harder one to do. And so by far the one that's used the most is this risk adjusting discount rate. Okay. And I'm going to start there because the concept's much easier. And it's really just saying that, hey, if you have an average project, we're going to use our average cost of capital, right? If you have a riskier project, we're gonna use a higher than average cost of capital. If you have a lower risk project, we're going to use a lower than average cost of capital, right? And so what this actually translates to often, and I think there's an example in the book here about you might have an average cost of capital that's 10%. For a riskier investment, the corporation adds 3 percentage points to the cost of capital to make it 13%. And if it's a less risky project, it takes 2 percentage points off. So really it's that kind of, it's not very precise, right? But it kind of gives you the directional sort of, numbers that you need. Okay. So that's kind of what the risk adjusting discount rate means. And then the certainty equivalent method is a little bit more complex. So I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's really the idea of if we can actually use our projected cash flows and find out where, what probability or what scenario allows us to have the greatest certainty. Okay, that's called our equivalent method. So, if you know that you're definitely going to have some cash flow coming in, and you figure out sort of where is that, or what is the least amount that I would feel comfortable with, and it creates that certainty where what we're calling a riskless cash flow. So again, it's a little bit more complicated, but I think the book brings it up, and it's just good to kind of have it so you can say that you learned about it. But I do think that the risk adjusting discount rate is the one that's going to be used mostly. So. Okay, so these are sort of just the general concepts here, and I'm not going to go into much more here, but what would you guys like to go into a few problems now, or do you want to? One of the things I also wanted to make sure is if anyone had any questions about the budget, because I know the budget is due, and I do want to make sure that I have just a couple minutes on that as well. Do folks have any budget questions, or should we go into problems?
I have one question. So are you looking for us to submit the final Word document in addition to the Excel sheet, or everything pasted on the Excel sheet?
No, I think what I had, and I'm hoping it's clear, and I apologize if it's not, I'll take a look at it. But what I was hoping is that this is your budget submission. It's going to be an Excel spreadsheet that has your budget in it. And in addition, it's going to be your budget narrative. Mm-hmm. So you'll have another opportunity to adjust your budget narrative based on the feedback I gave you, and any other changes you decide to make. And so normally when you get a budget submitted, it includes 2 pieces. It includes an Excel spreadsheet, which is actually the budget numbers, and it includes a narrative. So
okay.
When you submit like an RFP or a budget, often you have both of those things.
Okay, and the narrative will still be on a Word doc, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Are we going to be able to upload both documents, like for that assignment?
So do you mean, would you have trouble uploading 2?
Yes.
Have you had trouble before uploading 2 documents?
I never uploaded. No, actually, not true. For another class I have.
You can upload both of them. They'll let you.
Yeah, usually I've seen 2 there. But if you have any problems uploading, because I know some folks do have problems uploading, you can always send it to me.
Okay.
And then I can upload it. Yeah. Okay.
So
Any other?
just
Yeah.
for clarification, are you saying so the narrative that we already did with the recommendations that you made and then creating the actual budget in Excel, just maybe some modifications, but it's basically the narrative that we created, right? With the additional things that might be needed?
Yeah. And
Okay.
the reason why I did it that way is because last year I literally had everybody submit them at the same time. And I realized that, by submitting the narrative first, it allowed me to give you feedback, and then because a lot of people, it was really helpful to have that feedback, right?
Okay. Yeah,
But that's really what I was trying to do,
For the revenue and value part of the budgeting, that's what we reviewed in chapter 8, right? When creating a budget.
Well, so I think the value part of the budget has more to do with what we're learning right now, honestly,
Oh, okay.
and then maybe the previous chapter. So I think, like, I don't remember what your project was, Janet, but I think a lot of folks had projects that were about either increasing quality of service or reducing cost. And I don't think there's too many out there that are about generating more revenue. So the typical project that I've seen are about those two pieces, And so I think what I just wanted people to be able to think about was, how do you actually come up with a financial value to it? And I just really want you to think through that. And because I think most projects, even if it's, reducing, I think we had lots of different projects, but I'm just thinking, whether it's having more people come to, participate in your clinic, or reducing, hospitalizations. I mean, anything like that is going to have a financial impact, right? It's going to be positive. And I think what happens is a lot of folks didn't actually add anything about that. And so I just want you to think about that.
So mine was okay on that. I guess I'm just having trouble illustrating that number wise in my Capstone actual Excel spreadsheet.
I see. Do you want to send me what you have so far? And and if you have any specific questions, I can definitely take a look at it. I'm not going to give you an answer or anything, but I can definitely.
No, I just want to I just want to make sure I'm doing it right.
Yeah, prod you a little bit here and there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
If there's a social value to the project, can that be included in there? But because there's no profit value or no revenue value, but there's like a social.
Give me an example of what a social value is, where there's no profit or cost.
So my project is we're trying to hire a more diverse workforce to translate the research data that we study on the population, which is impoverished like a more poor population. Yeah, that's the right word. So I'm just trying to. That's the part that my project is very unique in that sense, that I'm like, there's a social value in the sense that we're going to be, if we have people that can relate to the population that we study, and we can translate the research study that we're doing, basically it's going to improve policy.
Is it possibly going to improve outcomes for the populations that are underserved?
If the policy is changed, yes.
Sorry, something that you might be able to do, right, is because it's research, so it's grant funded, right? So you have a certain amount of time as to by when you need to accomplish or enroll a certain number of patients. So you could say that the fact that increasing the workforce diversity would allow for a decrease in refusals. Therefore, you would accomplish your goal, your N, sooner or within the allotted time. So in the end, that translates into saving money, because you wouldn't ask for an extension, because you have to have the power, you probably, or someone probably knows how many patients you need to recruit for to have the power calculation. So if,
I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's so many projects going on right now that there's a need to hire all these people. So, and every project is very unique in the sense, like, you know, every grant has different criterias and different, and I guess I don't want to like take too much time, but I guess I can maybe talk to you, Malik, later about it.
Yeah, no, I think for the purposes of the narrative, honestly, because I don't necessarily expect you to put a revenue in your actual budget, but I think it's good if you understand the concepts and the ability to quantify the value. And so I would maybe, in your case, be a little bit more macro. Like when you're writing a grant, obviously you're writing a grant for a purpose to impact the like you say, the policy. Impacting policy means better outcomes, right? So it may not be directly, but there may be more of an indirect link. That's fine. Just speak to that, right? Because just as long as you understand what that looks like, right? And you put some number, if you even put some numbers to it, even if it's very hypothetical, right? Mm-hmm. Like a 1% reduction or a 1% increase in utilizations or birthing classes or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Improve outcomes, by X percent, right? I think that's just based on sort of statistics. So,
okay.
So we are to quantify the value of it in our budget Excel sheet?
I wouldn't necessarily, unless it's something that's very direct, like you have revenue or, that kind of thing. Because I'm only asking you, I believe, to do 1 year, right? Or am I asking you multiple years? I'm trying to remember now.
1 year.
1 year. Or the life of your project, maybe. But what I would love to see is you be able to speak to it in your narrative, so that there's some value that you're able to speak to. And if you ever have to do a RFP, I don't know if anyone's here has had to do one before, like a request for a proposal for a project or something. Often you do have to come up with some quantitative value of what you can bring, right? So I think it's important to have that, concept and practice it, right? That's what I'm looking for.
So we don't have to put it in the actual number part Excel spreadsheet. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your project. Like I said, if your project
mine, for
social
example,
value.
Okay.
Yeah, then I just want to see it in your narrative, and I want to see some high level concept of how you would quantify it. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on budget?
What about time? How would you capture time saved on a budget?
So usually if it's time saved, it's people time, right?
Yes.
Okay. So then you may say that, I don't know that your budget's gonna, I don't remember your budget, Mina, but like, let's say that, you're implementing a project, and the project you anticipate to have an impact over time. And that impact over time means you're going to reduce the needed resources in a particular process, right? So this is very similar to what we're learning about right now, which is the project is the outflow, right? Or the cash outflow, right? Because I'm getting confused. The cash inflow, right? It's like how much money you have to invest. This project is your investment. And then you're expected to see benefit over time, right? And the benefit that you expect to see over time is cost reduction, because you're going to require less people to do the same amount of work, right?
Or you would have the same amount of people, but you can get the work done quicker. So I guess technically you can cut staff.
Yeah. That's usually, and it doesn't mean that you have to fire staff. Like that's not necessarily what we're saying, but what it means is you can transfer staff to something else, right? That you can reallocate existing resources so you can do more, right?
Okay.
That's where there's value, right? And so then you could say it's a net decrease in cost because you need less people to do the same thing. That doesn't mean you wouldn't invest that excess staffing in something else. You may decide to invest it in another project, right? And bring even more value to the organization, right? And that's where you get this idea of, you know, is the project valuable to the organization? Is there some type of quantitative value so you can figure out whether or not this is where you should spend your time and money? And are there other projects that your organization could do or should do that would bring more value to the organization, right?
I see.
I feel like it's really relevant to what we're learning right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
That makes sense?
Yeah, makes sense. I'll follow up with email. I have one.
Okay, great.
8 o'clock.
I know, but we talked a bit on the front end. Can folks stay a little bit longer, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What do you want to maybe look at a couple problems, or? Yep.
Mhm.
Okay.
Definitely look through the problems.
Okay. So this was a really tough chapter, and I went through these myself. Yeah, this is pretty tough. Listen. So I don't know how far folks got on these problems. Did Janet, were you able to get a little bit farther on this, or? I know Janet, you seem to be pretty good, if I'm not mistaken, on some of the math stuff, right?
Sorry, what was that?
How far were you able to get
On the problems?
on some of the problems? Yeah, were you able to make it past the beginning few, or?
Yeah, I think I'm on number 6 right now.
Okay.
If I remember correctly.
Okay. And I know some of them are kind of involved because you kind of have to do, it takes a little time on some of these. So I did the first few here. I did the first two actually. So let me go through these just as an example. And then if we need to do a problem together that I haven't done it myself, we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the first one. And I have not changed the values, which I probably should, because I get in trouble. I get myself in trouble for not doing that. But I'm gonna just look at the first problem here. So this is project. We have. I kind of changed the orientation here. I have it going. Yeah, no, I guess I have it going. I have it going down. Never mind. Excuse me. So this is the probability of the different scenarios here, and we have the NPV for each scenario. Okay, and what we're told in the book is that the most likely scenario is this middle one here, which is 50%. Okay, probability. All right, and okay. So what they're asking is, what are the project's expected NPV and standard deviation of NPV? So when we looked at, when the book talked about what expected NPV is, they talked about how the expected NPV is in fact the most likely NPV, okay? So the most likely in this scenario is 120. Okay, so that's going to be what it's asking for first. Okay, and then when it asks for the standard deviation NPV, so really that is a calculation that I don't even think that the book gave us a really clear formula for that. Janet, did you see a formula for that in the book? I didn't actually see one.
No, I didn't. Actually, I YouTubed it.
Yeah.
Or Googled it. I forget which one.
Right. So unfortunately, it's not super easy, that one. But what?
Sorry, Malay. If you look at page 571, it did define the formula for expected NPV.
I think, if I'm not mistaken,
We already filled in the numbers for it, so.
Expected NPV, but it's not the standard deviation, right?
We have
no,
it too. It's in the
you're
middle
right.
of the page.
But it says we can calculate the standard deviation on page 571 from the formula. Using the distribution of MPVs, we can calculate the standard deviation.
Yeah, but it's not giving you a formula, right? Yeah, so that's what, it's a little bit hard. It's not giving you a formula, but the formula is, I think I might have done it on this one. Let's see, did I do? The formula for standard deviation is you take the, first you just do an average. You know, you identify, and some called a mean. Let's call it a mean. Okay, so really the mean is you're adding up, right? You're adding up the different NPVs, okay? And you're dividing that by the total number, right? In this case, we have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm dividing it by 5, okay? So I'm getting 66,000, okay? Now, the book is actually telling us instead of using the mean, we're going to use the expected. So I know that is a little bit confusing, but because I think in a YouTube video, you would actually see the mean. But since what we're being told is the expected value is, in this case, actually, it's 120, right? It's 120. So we're told that that is, in fact, the most likely expected value. So we're going to use, for the expected value, we're going to just go ahead and put 120. And then what we have is we have the NPV here for these different scenarios. And what we want to do then is we want to take the variance of the NPV and the expected value. So what it's really saying is, here's a whole bunch of different scenarios. These scenarios are going to give us wildly different NPVs. We think the most likely is 120, okay? And so what we want to calculate is what is the variance between each one of these different probabilities and our most likely scenario, okay? Which is essentially what this variance column is, right? It's basically just saying, you know, this first scenario, I'm seeing a variance of $820,000, right? The second, it's a variance of 370. In my third scenario, I am in fact, not having a variance because I'm already at my expected NPV. And then in this scenario, we've got 80 and then 180. I'm going to just put a number next to each of these. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what we do then is once we have that variance, now this is where it gets a little more complicated, but what it's asking you to do is to take the value, the variance, and take the I'm going to say square root, but not a square, power of 2, okay? And that's essentially what you do. You take it by the power of 2, okay? And then you're going to multiply that times your probability, okay? So then it gives you another number that's really huge, okay? And you're gonna pull that down and do that for all of them. Then you sum it, and then you're going to take the power of 1/2. So in the book, you can see the formula is there, but I just wanted you to understand exactly how to do it. So you're taking, this is to the power of 2, multiplying it times the probability. Okay. All right. And then you're taking the sum and you're doing that to the power of 1/2. Okay. So essentially you're almost taking it back. So you're doing this sort of like power of 2 and then you're doing it back to the 1/2 to get it back, right? So what's interesting is if you were to just take an average here, you know, of the variances, you know, we're at 930. That's a sum, excuse me. And then let's do an average just because. Like here is here. Okay, an average. We're at 186, right? So what it's doing is it's basically weighting, essentially. It's weighting your the actual variance, so that you have an idea of the it's a standard deviation coefficient, essentially, right? So it's 605 is what I get. Did anyone else have an answer that was different than that? April, were you able to do this problem?
Yes, well, but I used the book way. Takes me a while. Yes, it's the same answer.
Same answer. Okay.
Yeah, your way is much easier. The book way is a lot more complicated.
Yeah. So I think and what I did is I did the book answer over here just so I could make sure I had the right answer as well, because I wanted to make sure I did it correctly. So this is what the problem in the book gave us 570. So that's how I kind of checked my work, right? Okay, so that's essentially then what we're doing here is we're saying that the expected NPV is 120, all right? And this column is actually not important. I'm going to take that out. Okay. All right. And so, and this really gets, it does kind of get us confused a bit because of the numbers are so large, but, just to kind of understand this. So we have a project that has a standard deviation of 605. Okay. And I think I'm not at this page now. We answered the two questions, expected and standard deviations. That's kind of that's how you answer that. I'm going to, let's see here. The next problem, 15.2. This one is showing we have year 0, okay? We've got 3 different probabilities, okay, for this Hollywood Diagnostics Enterprise, okay? And we have our year 0, okay? So we're going to calculate our NPV, which is just a plain old normal NPV, right? We know the calculation, the formula for that, which is NPV rate. Our rate is 10%. That's our corporate cost of capital, 10%. So I put that in as the first item, rate. And we take our year 0 through 5, okay, and that's our NPV. And then we add to that our first year of our outflows, or our inflows, sorry. Our cash investment, which is the $100,000. So we can see that that's basically what we're doing here, right? We're adding the rate, the series of outflows, and then our inflow value that we're not going to take it at present value because it already is at present value, okay? So that means that our under our 0.2 probability here, we have a negative NPV of 17,975. Okay. Under our 0.6 probability, we have a positive NPV, 19,932. And I'm saying that this is our base case because it's the highest probability. Okay. And so I'm just saying that our base case is in fact the 19,933. Okay. Highest probability meaning most likely. Okay. And then this one's a probability of 0.2. And so in this scenario, it would be our best case essentially, and that same formula, and that would be giving us an NPV of 57. So what we have here is we have if you want to think about it in terms of worst case, most likely, base case, we call it. And then this is the best case, right? So those are our 3 sort of scenarios, right, that the book offers us. So here's our net NPV. That's one of the questions. And what it says is, what is the expected NPV assuming an average risk? And we know that our average corporate cost of capital, the book tells us, is 10%. First cost of capital, it's 10%. And so that's always going to be average risk. That's an average risk. So if it's telling us that the project average, then we're always going to use that one. Okay. Okay. And so here it's asking us, what are the most likely worst case and best case NPVs? So really what we're doing is we're just calculating, just as I did, the NPV on the 3 scenarios. Okay. That's the answer for that one. What is the project's expected NPV on the basis of the scenario analysis? Okay. And I didn't get this far yet, so I apologize. But April or Janet, were you guys able to answer this question? You want to walk us through this?
That one I actually left for the lecture, hoping you reviewed that part, because the math gets a little bit, it got a little confusing for me.
April, were you able to do the?
No, sorry.
No, you didn't either. Oh goodness. Okay. I thought it was like easy for you. No. Okay. So the expected NPV on the basis of the scenario analysis. Okay. So I think we have to go back to the actual question here. Let's see. Okay. So it's basically the 5-year values include salvage value. Okay. And just look and make sure I'm not missing a piece here because my daughter just got home. Okay. So this one, it might be better if what I do is kind of like what I had suggested is maybe I'll go through a few of these problems because I do have a couple questions in the email, and I'll maybe walk through these and just create a second YouTube video to kind of walk through, and I'll have a little more time to go through them myself. So which problems would you guys like to look at? So I can do this one for sure. And I think there's some other questions out there. Any other problems that you, or particular ones you want to sort of?
15.4.
15.4, okay. Mm-hmm. Anything on that one in particular that you having trouble with, or just the whole thing?
Just the whole thing.
Okay. Okay. And that's as far as you got, right?
Yeah.
So Malay, this is April. I just quick input. So I realized the book, for the first few chapters, I always follow the books. And then when I come to your office hours, I realize your way is so much easier. And then so slowly I start kind of waiting until your office hour, look at your way. So then I can do it much faster because normally books, if you just look at it, the example that we had at 571, right, to do the calculation of expected value and deviation, the book way is so much, it takes more time consuming, and your way is so much faster. So that kind of, from the past experience, I start thinking, okay, I'm going to wait until I go through your office hour, then I do my homework. Well,
this might be a good practice for me to do a few of the problems without, actual office hours, but I can just record them and kind of walk through them on my own. I'll try to do it slower, not so fast, but then maybe that will be good to kind of do a little practice for myself, and you guys can give me feedback on if it was helpful. How's that? So I'll do this 15.3 and then 15, sorry, I'll finish at 15.2. I'll do 15.3. And then I can do 15.4, but I also think maybe I could go to one of the harder ones. I'll look at the problems and I'll pick maybe the hardest one because some of these aren't as hard as the others. And then maybe I'll try to, change it up a little bit, and then I'll do examples.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
No problem. Then you don't have to wait while I figure it out. Okay.
When do you think you'll have that YouTube video ready? Not to
I'm
put
gonna
any
do it
pressure on you,
tonight. Yeah, I'm gonna do it tonight because I know that you guys need to hand this in. So I'm gonna work on it now.
unless you're gonna give us an extension.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you guys feel like you need extensions, you could always ask for them. But I just want to make sure I understand why. So I'm fine to give extensions for extenuating circumstances, but I know it would be hard to give everybody an extension every time, right? So I think, and then it just feeds on yourself, right? So because you have so much other work to do. But I'm happy to hear if you guys have anything in particular you want, you're asking for. Please go ahead and let me know.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. I hope you have a wonderful night, and I'll post this a little bit later. Okay.
The homework is still due Sundays, right?
Thank you.
Sunday, yes.
Both
Yeah.
the assignments.
Everything is due on Sunday.
Everything's due on Sunday, unless you guys ask for some type of extension.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. Good night.
Okay. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Thanks.